the good news part of this, what you listen to, and talks about very simple technologies you can do at home that are very inexpensive, don't involve having to hire consultants, and succeed with your flooding problems, your stormwater problems, your stream bank erosion problems. So let's get started with the don'ts. So gabions are these water baskets full of rock. And they were really popular back in the early 80s. Because the thought was, boy, you could stabilize roads, stream banks with these wire baskets full of rock, and it wasn't concrete. Somehow that was better. And there were some efforts to put soil in between the rocks and grow stuff, but I have to say, every time I tried that, it failed. So the environmental aspects of them just never really came through. So next one. And you can see how they warp, they bend, that they are structurally not reliable. Okay, next one. Another idea about how to stabilize streams that came out of the engineering community was, let's pour concrete on the banks. I mean, maybe the gabion baskets are buckling, but the concrete should hold it, right? Well, you'll see that concrete is one of the worst materials to use around water. The water gets, builds up, the pore pressure builds up behind the concrete. The stream undercuts the toe where the concrete is resting. And so we have a long history of just concrete failing around streams. So next slide. This is in Orinda. Contra Costa County decided they should pour concrete along the side of San Pedro Creek in the city of Orinda. One of the ideas behind concrete was, if we can make the creek really smooth, get the vegetation out of it, it will make the water go faster. That'll mean that you can get more water through the system at a lower stage. It was a flood control idea. But you can see how, again, the water got behind these concrete slabs, buckled them, made a big mess. The Friends of San Pablo Creeks are now in the whole process of taking these out and using some of these more successful strategies we'll talk about. Next slide. This is an Army Corps project down in Orange County. The Army Corps had me down there to look at this with them a number of years ago. And up this creek. They also put some concrete slides in it. They made it all concrete. Again, the idea was, let's have the water go fast. That'll be a flood control project. And what happened was the stream was steepened by taking out one of these meanders. And it undercut the concrete toe. What you're seeing in that photo, right here, just big slabs of concrete being strewn downstream, and the Army Corps is just madly dropping riprap around it to try to hold it together so it doesn't all fail at once. So, what's happening here is we have this conventional engineering practices that comes out of, let's say, the Los Angeles River in the 1930s. Everybody wanted to straighten things out and put it in concrete. That was like the really cat's meow in stream engineering. But we started to learn from putting these systems in how they fail. So let's go to the next slide. Riprap. Now, part of my history is I started out in California, working for the California Department of Water Resources. I was located up in Sacramento. We had a program we called Sacramento River Bank Protection. This slide is from about 1976 or 77. That's how old I am. I was on the first Gary Brown administration. And, look what's happening. The bank is blowing out downstream of the riprap. The bank is blowing out upstream of the riprap. The rock was put there to protect that orchard in the background. That was probably a walnut orchard. Then if you were able to stand here and look across the river, you would see that the opposite bank had blown out too. Then these smart-ass graduate students from UC Davis got in some boats. They floated down the Sacramento River and they started recording the number of areas where our really beautiful riprap projects were blown out. As a matter of fact, the river was going right around our rock. So there were rock islands in the middle of the Sacramento River. And we didn't appreciate this. And so the Reading office of the Department of Water Resources decided maybe what we should do instead is have a green belt or a program where we actually acquire land along a river, have a riparian forest there, and that's what would hold the river together. So that's where that went. All right, next slide. And this happens on a small scale as well as a big scale on the Sacramento River. This is a smaller creek in Richmond. Riprap was put up on the banks to stop it from eroding. You know, what happens is, you know, the dynamic here is that the banks are hardened. The stream starts to pick up sediment from the bottom because it can't pick it up from the sides like it would normally do. The bottom of the stream starts to go like this. And then the rock all falls down because it's been undercut. Okay, next slide. Sac Creek was also really popular 80s and 90s. I'm pointing to where the bank blew out just upstream of the Sac Creek, and it also blew out downstream. So when you harden stream banks, this was going on in the Sacramento River too, with riprap projects. It creates these vortexes like this in the stream or river that erode around these hard points. So, you know, live and learn. Okay, next one. This is a property in Martinez where that Sac Creek was put on the opposite side and their bank is just blowing out everywhere. You know what? We should probably turn the lights off.
Yeah, it's a little bit on the dark side.
Right here, is that possible? Yeah. Otherwise you could, these are there. Yeah, so the poor woman's property here on the forefront of the slide is just, you know, collapsing because of what her neighbor did years ago. And actually, I hate to say it, but that was like a federal government project, but, okay, next slide. Next slide. All right, so, you know, one of the thoughts of the engineering community was, what if we put these little weirs or dams across the bottom of creeks and they'll catch sediment, right? And then they'll start to fill in, right? Just like sediment falls in behind dams. And then the banks won't be so high. That is a kind of a bank stabilization strategy. We'll just bring the bottom of the creek up. Okay, so that's what they tried to do here at Torrey Pine State Park. That blue part of the slide shows where the creek used to be. That's what it used to look like. That this is a gabion weir. It was dropped into the bottom of that creek. Indeed, the sediment dropped out behind it. The creek started to fill up. And then what happened was it flattened the slope. So just think about what you know about streams you've seen around here. If you take a hike up a hill and you see a really steep stream, it kind of cascades like this, right? Sort of like steps and pools. That's the way that stream dissipates its energy. When you get down to the really flat areas of a stream, the way it dissipates its energy is by meandering. So if you take a stream and start flattening it, the stream goes, oh, okay, I'm going to dissipate my energy by meandering. And so it meanders right around these little dams and weirs.
and creates all this unintended damage. Okay, next slide. And this is where San Jose has a park where they wanted to create more playing space. So they said, okay, we're gonna take out one of the stream meanders, put in this really substantial concrete work at Ajax up there, and fill it in, put in a bunch of riprap, fill it in, and create more space. Well, the stream, and then, because they straighten the stream, you have to make up for the lost elevation. Does that make sense? So, before, if you were going from A to B downstream, there was a lot of length of the stream. We shortened it, so now the stream has to drop a lot. Right? So we put that weir in, and the stream just took everything out. Just went back to its old meander. Okay? So yeah, this is in one of my Nature Bats Last slideshows. So you try to go in and make the stream do what you want to, but the stream has other ideas. So next slide. This might have been an Army Corps project, or maybe it was an Orange County project. But what they wanted to do was take out a meander so that upstream of here they could build, it was a B-1 bomber factory, and create more land space for that. And again, they needed to put in a weir to get the elevation dropping for the stream. And let's just see what it looks like immediately downstream. Okay. So what happens with these weirs, we just talked about it, is they collect sediment. And they flatten the slope behind. Right, the other thing going on is the water going over that weir dam has just dropped the sediment it's able to carry. When it comes back down into the stream channel, it picks up the sediment it had dropped behind the weir and carries that sediment downstream. So the stream has this certain capacity to pick up sediment. When it's sort of saturated with the sediment it can carry, there you go, it's an equilibrium. So that's the other hazard of putting in dams, is they catch sediment, and this is called hungry water. The water is hungry to pick up the sediment and it just lost upstream. Okay, this bank erosion, I have another slide, I have to go through my collections, that shows thousands of feet downstream blown out. And the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service was really, really unhappy about this because this was a whole forested area. They had spent a lot of money putting in to create Leesville's vireo habitat, endangered bird in Southern California. So, here we have death and destruction just from putting in these little dams. Okay, next slide. Another example of a failure of a stream. These are gabions. This was done by a large water agency in the Bay Area. Bank stabilization project. This was put in about October, November. Where that concrete apron is, yeah, it used to be the bottom of the creek. By lining the sides of the channel, the creek just picked up the sediment it usually carries along from the bottom, instead of from the bottoms and the sides. So the bottom does what? Starts to entrench. And then the bottom part that was holding up those concrete aprons is kind of going. So the whole thing is starting to tumble in. Okay, next slide. So I visited Harris County, Texas. An interesting place because it has the most flood damage claims in the United States under the National Flood Insurance Program. Yeah, it's where Houston is. They have terrible problems. They have all kinds of flood control channels. And the articulated concrete block salesman started hitting public works departments in the 90s. And they go, look, you can have concrete and you can have plants too. You buy our product, it's concrete, it's got holes in it. So you can put plants through the holes, and then you've got the concrete there to hold the banks. Okay. So they drove me through miles of these failed articulated concrete blocks. Yeah, there's no real horizontal or vertical structure there to hold these things in place. And so they just easily fail. Next slide. More articulated concrete block failure slides. Next slide. Here's another version from the Bay Area. So the part of the problem here was, I think this project interfered too much with the natural shape of the creek. So if you start narrowing your creeks, the creeks will blow stuff out. If you make the creeks too wide, it'll slow the low flows down to the point where the creek drops the sediment and it starts to fill in. So you don't want a creek that's too wide or too narrow. All right, next slide. More of that. Next slide. This is a Napa River system. Okay, enough of that. Next slide.
I'm sorry, the previous slide, the rocks on it.
Yeah,
issue?
so they drop rocks to try to save the articulated concrete blocks. Okay, next slide. All right, next slide. Hey, thank you, Jerry. Next slide. One idea that the product makers came up with is let's put these cells. Sometimes the cells are plastic, sometimes they're concrete, sometimes they're even metal. And we'll put those in and it'll allow plants to grow on the stream bank. Most of the time what happens is you end up with a whole bunch of weeds. Okay, next slide. Rock gardening. Now this one, the whole idea of, let's enhance our streams. Let's beautify them. And we'll put rocks along them. And then we'll go to the nursery and we'll buy a bunch of really pretty plants. And we'll plant the plants in amongst the rocks. Okay, so that's what this group did. And this is the city of El Cerrito. You see a whole line of sword ferns right there. And these plants, I'm not sure they even made it a year. Because, think about what you know about streams. There's tall trees, there's willows, there's alders, there's lots of shade. If you buy these plants that usually are understory plants, like sword ferns, for example, and you plant them out because you think they're pretty, they'll die very quickly because they're out there in the full sun. Okay? Next slide. Okay, what are hydraulic constrictions? Okay, class, I want you to remember this term. And you're never going to forget it. It's what you're going to remember from the whole PowerPoint show is hydraulic constrictions. So after I say hydraulic constrictions, you're going to repeat after me, right? Hydraulic constrictions. Oh, loud. Hydraulic constrictions. Are you going to remember that? Okay, what are they? If you come in and you squeeze the water under a bridge, a railroad a trestle, in a culvert that's too small, right? What's going to happen? The water's going to go over the top. It's going to go around the sides. It's going to flood your community. Okay. So if you really want to stop flooding in your community, you talk with your local engineers about, can we make these culverts bigger the next time you come through? Or can you design the failing bridge to be wider, right? So the hydraulic part means what? Water, flowing water, and constrictions means you're narrowing it. Okay, so what was that term again? Hydraulic constrictions. And you're not gonna do that to creeks in your backyard, right? You're not gonna put your patio right up against the creek channel, right? You're not gonna put it through, you're not gonna put a lot of riprap or stuff that narrows the creek, right? Right, okay. Jessica's gonna show you the right way to handle these things. Right, that's a really bad hydraulic constriction on Pinole Creek. Yeah, sometimes you just even have salmon, the fish get stuck on top of the traps. You know, the water goes over, yeah. Okay, next slide. Okay, we talked about channels too narrow, too flat. Let's get into this. This channel is too narrow. It was basically dug out by, in the old days, by farmers, you know, who wanted to grow hay in the fields. Look at how the creek, yeah, so it's too short. So let's say I'm skiing down a mountainside and I just go straight down like this. I gotta go really fast. What else is gonna happen? I gotta break my neck, right? So, because I'm in this over steepened situation, if I wanna make the channel less steep, I'm gonna go like this, right? Have a longer trip, right? Downhill. That's what this creek is doing. It was straightened, it's too steep. The creek is adjusting to that by trying to make meanders. Next slide. And you just have wholesale bank failure when that kind of thing happens. Okay, next slide. And so this is the too wide slide. All right, this is the San Lorenzo River. How am I doing on time?
You've got 10 more minutes.
Some of this, that's not too bad. Okay, so this river used to be this wide. Okay. Then the city of Santa Cruz worked with the Army Corps to widen it way out to there, to where that levee is. And the whole idea was, all right, let's widen the river, it will hold more water. So the city won't flood. Right? And you see there's a bridge downstream, this part of the river system. And what happened is if you really widen something during the low and moderate stream flows, the water spreads out. It drops its sediment, like right here, and it starts to fill in. So this whole flood control project that people spend millions of dollars with filled in. And they almost flooded very badly after the flood control project was put in. Okay, next slide. So we really talked about how if you take out meanders, it steepens the slope and it can undercut bridges and all kinds of things. All right, next slide. Okay, so there was this disconnect between the engineering community and local governments. The engineering community, like the premier engineering community, was like the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. And they kind of set the standards for river engineering in the country. Actually, a lot of the Soil Conservation Service is like that. And so they helped a lot of local governments build these flood control projects, bank stabilization projects, and the local governments started to cycle back to the Army Corps experts and say, you know what? This isn't working for us. It's creating a lot of maintenance. We have performance problems. And the Corps would turn over these projects to local governments and local entities and say, okay, we helped you build it. Now it's up to you to maintain it. And so they got cut off from a feedback loop about the performance problems of conventional engineering. So the Corps went, okay, this isn't good. This isn't the way the Army should operate. So they went out to their Army Corps divisions and districts and started to look at their projects. And this was a publication from, okay, so it's 1990. And it showed the extent to which riprap was failing, the, weirs were failing, the grade control structures were failing. About grade control structures, the report said, we don't seem to understand grade control. Okay. So, next one. Oh, now we're going to the hopeful part for Jessica. And I'll forward her slides.
All right.
Okay, all ready to be lifted up?
Yes.
Okay.
Thanks, Riley. Okay, so a lot of you picked up the packets about bioengineering techniques, and you're gonna see screenshots of some things in those packets, and then we're gonna show some examples of where you see how those things are being implemented. This is actually not in the packet, but as Riley said, opening up hydraulic constrictions. So a lot of times if there's flooding, the first thing you want to do is walk downstream and see if you have a culvert or a bridge. Those sweet little pedestrian bridges. Any of these kinds of things that are going to narrow up the amount of room that the water can flow through. Because what's going to happen, right, when that is, or if there's debris racked up on it, it's going to cause water to back up. That water's going to rise. It's going to spill out. And so when you have a flood, that's the first thing to look for. And when you can, opening that up so there's more flow is the solution. And so this is not pivotal, right?
That's Cornice's
That's
Creek in
Cornice's.
Albany.
Right, so this is one of those creeks that you were seeing. And this, the opportunity arose to create that capacity and address this kind of issue. Historically, a lot of these problems are at old railroad crossings. And, I'm from the LA area. I know some of the history of the LA River, and a lot of the catastrophic flooding that people think about for the LA River actually was caused by trestle bridges, which, are like X's crossing these rivers. And those X's were racking up branches and debris and causing the river to blow out of levees and flood catastrophically. So really a common problem associated with that. And more importantly, the solution is opening it up. Okay, so let's say you have some bank instability. One of our most common approaches for dealing with this is to take willows and take live cuttings of them when in the winter time, because that's when they've gone dormant. And you can see we snip the edge of the stake or the post, and we drive it into the ground. Willow is a wonderful plant material for stream systems. There are forms of willow all over the world. This is a very common technique that has been used since time immemorial. Like we're going back to the Romans, we're going back to the Aztec. This has been used for a very long period of time to stabilize banks. And what we like to do is to drive these stakes into the banks in a sort of alternating grid pattern. And you want the stakes to be long enough so that they have access, the soil is moist and a little bit sticks out above. Some people say 1/3, some people say 1/5 stays above the ground. And as you go into spring, it's going to sprout. And the roots, most importantly, are very fibrous. They're going to spread. They have high tensile strength. And that means that when the stream flow is attacking the bank, this tensile strength has the ability to resist that shear force that you see. So we like to use willow. Cottonwood can also be used if you are in the right place, climate situation for it. Alder are not as successful as stakes. They might be about 50% successful, but you could also use alders. There are other smaller riparian streamside plants like red twig dogwood and Pacific ninebark that to some degree can also be used in this way. So gonna move on to the next slide. And so here you can see an example post installation of willow posts and what this looks like as it grows in. So this is a very successful way of using willow. And one of the other things I want to mention about willow is, so if you harvest it, we're doing it in the winter, You've gotten approval from whatever agency you need to go to a obliging willow tree. And you're gonna take your sample. You never wanna take too much from any one tree, right? This is just good harvesting practice. You're gonna make sure that you're harvesting so that the branch you're taking, the end that's gonna go in the ground is the end that's closest to the trunk. And we always slant that when we're cutting it, so we know which end is down. But you wanna soak it in water until you're gonna do the installation. And when you're soaking it in the water, willow will release into the water a hormone that it uses for rooting. And so if you have other projects where you want to root some plants, you use that water. It's just a little tip. Okay, next slide. So here's some examples. And we've got someone who has harvested his willow. He has looked for straight branches. He's looking for things 2 to 4 inches in diameter. Maybe you could go up to 6 inches, right, Riley? 4, 6 inches.
I kind of stop and find.
All right, so there we go. So, that gives you a good sort of threshold for what these posts look like. And then here we go, we're starting to slice those edges so we know which end goes in. And next slide. And you've got people who are, you create holes using rebar, and then you drive in the posts or the stakes. And then as they go in, you can trim the top so you've got a nice clean cut. Next slide. Here we are. You can do it with your friends. Next slide. And you can use big equipment, but you got to get permits if you're going to do that. Next slide. Anyway, I guess that was showing you the process, right? And now we're going to talk about another technique that is used. These are fascines. You might have seen something that looks like this if you drive by a construction site and you see those fibrous rolls that they use. So that's kind of a similar thing, but this is different because we're using live willow material. Again, live branch material. You can also use dead branches. And you and your buddies are going to stand in a line. This. And someone's going to lay the branches in your arms. And someone's going to come and tie them off. You can make thin willow, you can make fat, fashy, it's up to you how big you want them, depending on how you're going to use them. And then one of the ways that they're used is to install them along the contours of a slope. And what that does is, if you have runoff coming from above, it helps to buffer the erosive power of that water coming down the slope. And as the willow grow, it's going to just, arrest that issue altogether. You can do combos of things. So you can do this. You can put in stakes, those posts that we saw earlier. You can do this, and you can put other kinds of plantings in if you are looking to landscape this slope with other riparian plants. So it's a very useful technique. Sometimes people put it at the toe of a bank, and then they do a different bioengineering treatment above it. People see an example like that. Next. So here's some people making the fascines, and you can see that in these cases, they're actually putting wood stakes on the sides of the fascines to hold them in place. And you can see here, looks like they're doing them up the bank. Next slide. Okay, and this is where a fascine is at the toe of a slope. And you can see that above it, there's the posts and erosion control blanket. Next. So brush matting is another technique, and I've been talking about this one a lot today. I've done a few site visits. So you have banks and they're eroding. Maybe there's some tough flows coming up on them. We were just hearing about how if you over narrow a creek, it's gonna, first it's gonna down cut and then it's gonna start to take from the banks. The first solution is, if you have room, give your creek more room. If you don't have that room, then you're really about, well, how do I manage this really constrained, tight space? And manage is the operative word, because you're going to have to probably keep doing this to manage this situation. But you can use brush matting, which is layers of the branches and brush material, leaves with an erosion control fabric, with stakes and ties that you wire it all in with along these banks. And these examples look pretty like, oh, that's a shallow slope. you can actually do this on pretty steep slopes. Can I see the next slide, please? So here's an example where we've had some erosion. I don't think, this isn't the tree out.
Yeah, a tree fell over.
Tree fell out.
Took out the bank.
You know, a few years ago, there was a lot of rain, a lot of trees fell in this region. So there's these gaping holes. And pretty scary when you've got your patio or your deck or whatever, really close to that bank now. So next slide. So this is, you can see how steep this is. You can also see how deep it is. And here is Cusp with this homeowner, with the RCD out here, actually installing these brush mat systems. And you see there's erosion control fabric. There's some, to help you get up and down the slope. You know, some people are, you know, you're actually literally putting in ropes and cables to go up and down and to stay safe. But you can see the brush material of the willow being installed. Next. And, you know, you're seeing a little more progress with it. You can see some staking in and some wiring in and, you know, protecting of that system going in. Next, please.
How's the ivy in this situation?
What do you mean?
The ivies that in the previous slide.
Can you go back? So there's ivy in the other area. The area that we're focusing on is the area that got eroded out. We wouldn't advise planting ivy, and in fact, we advise removing it and replanting with native riparian species. But you can see as it's growing in, so you can see that this is actually working in this very steep, probably high shear stress condition. Next slide.
It's about a year later.
Yeah, and you see how close it is to that gazebo, so that's like nail biting, right? And, you know, we just want to recognize that this is made possible with the RCD of Contra Costa that comes in and works with us and helps some volunteers. Okay, so here's another one where you had stormwater coming down from the driveway, that's going over bank and scouring from the top down. I think we had another tree that came out here.
Yeah, that tree over there fell in,
Yeah,
palm tree.
yeah, over here. So, and you know, I just want to mention, so a couple things happen when these trees come out. One is the soil gets saturated. A lot of times that's happening because of there's so much rainfall at one time. But sometimes it's happening because there's that extra source of water that's also weakening the banks. And so if you take a look at your property, look at where it's going. Watch it in the rain and see where it really is going. And you may be surprised to find out it's going over bank. And that can be part of the problem. Next slide. And so here we are again with our mighty team of Cusp folks and the RCD, AmeriCorps volunteers, neighbors coming together to install one of these systems on the bank. And again, you see the erosion control fabric first thing down. You see the brush being laid in, and what you aren't seeing is a whole lot of note that's kind of hard to see, but some of it's starting to be installed to really get it onto the bank. Next slide. And you know, a little bit more of the technique you see going in. You see how vertical that is. And you know, right next to it, you know, you can see just like it's super vulnerable. Next slide. And it's grown in. And some of this driveway has been reconfigured. Next slide. And then this is it several years later. So it's this area right here. And that's the reconfiguring of the driveway. Just a small adjustment to redirect stormwater so it's not going over bank. Next slide. So, you know, and again in Berkeley, here's another super confined, super vertical sort of situation where you can see they've installed the erosion control fabric. They've put live posts of willow in a nice grid pattern over here. They're laying in the brush, they're wiring it in. Next slide. Here's the wire. You can see I just put little arrows to show you where that's used. Now, we usually like to recommend biodegradable materials, but sometimes you do use wire, just as a practical fact. But you can also use wire string or rope. Okay, next slide. So Marin County, you heard about gabions earlier. When they fail, you often see a mess of rock in the stream bed or the toe. And that to me shows me, oh, there's something failed. And you start, go looking around and then you find a hot mess like that. Next slide. So that's another situation where you remove the riprap and you can put in one of these systems. This is another version of it where they included soil with the branches. Mix it in. You can see the erosion control blanket again. You see the posts. And you see, this is with the biodegradable rope going between everything. Next slide. And this is it having grown in. And next slide. So a more high intensity approach, very similar situation. Is when you have these failing banks, a lot of times they're what you call the outside bend of a stream meander. So if you think about how streams meander, that outside bend, the water's hitting that bank, that's where the greatest shear stress on the bank is. And so that's most often where we see problems. When people say, oh, I've got a bank failure, that's usually where it's happening. And so if you have a high shear stress situation and not a lot of room, you can't regrade it back. Maybe it's too high of a shear stress for something like the last few systems, those brush mattresses that we were showing, and you saw those are high stress situations where those are in. Then something like the brush layering can be helpful. It's basically a lasagna of willow stakes and posts, soil, willow stakes and posts, soil. And it can be done 2-to-1 slope, can be done up to a 1.5-to-1 slope in a lot of conditions. Obviously not super sandy soils, but in a lot of types of soils you can do it. So here's one such installation going in with big equipment. You can see the layers of the lasagna. Next slide. And here you see it done with the addition of the erosion control fabric enclosing the soil layer. So you've got your branches, soil layer, and erosion control. Etc. On up the slope. Next slide.
Yeah, that was put in just by a homeowner.
Good to know. Thank you. And this is it with a storm. Next slide. And what do we got here? This is where the concrete, that same storm, undercutting the concrete.
Yeah, so that was that building downstream a little bit.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, so,
So the brush layering is holding up. And right here, the water's going right under the concrete.
yeah. So this is where that live material, again, think about vegetation is buffering the banks from the intensity of the flows. And concrete just bouncing it off and causing a problem somewhere else. Next slide. So, and this is what this looks like, it looks like a stream bank once it's grown in. Next slide. So this is an example of a system. This is a technical drawing that gives you a sense of, how to do that. There's a little bit more worked in. So there's these stakes in between to stabilize it. The anchors. This is kind of the more technical side of that. And this is a table that shows you the shear stress capacity and the velocity resistance of a lot of different techniques of bank protections. And we've got in our blue box here the soil bioengineering methods. And so what you'll see is that, a live brush mattress like we were describing can handle pretty high shear stresses up to 8.2 units, which of course I can't remember, pounds per square inch, something like that. And then, the brush layering goes up to 6.2 pounds per square inch. So the vegetated choir mat, so like there's a lot of, the willow sticks go up to 3. They can handle velocities up to 10. I will tell you on the LA River, willow handles up to 14. So, that's the power of these plant materials. Okay, next slide. Okay, so Here is an example of a project that Cuss was a part of, or the Waterways Restoration Institute, which Riley runs. And this is a stream that was partly channelized in this kind of ditch-like form that you see, and partly in a pipe. And it's through a small lot in between the Berkeley-Albany border. And as part of a housing development, this parcel was given over to restore the creek. You can see it's constrained. Next, oh, and I want to mention this is a steelhead bearing stream. Okay, next slide. And so the soil lifts that we were just looking at were used because of how narrow this site was and how constrained it was. And you see a trash rack that's part of the system. So, you know, these banks are probably 1.5 to 1. They're about 13 feet high from the bottom of the stream. And, you know, if you're looking at it from the top, you know, it looks really steep. I'm like, how am I gonna get down there? But you can. We've made it possible. But this is the kind of system we're talking about. So the next slide. This is it as it's starting to grow in. We're looking at it from above. And the next slide. And this is it a number of years later. We're down in the stream doing a survey, kind of just checking out how the channel has adjusted and what's going on there. And you get a really nice sense of the stream in this picture on the right. And on the left, you can see how much the willows have grown and are now part of the actual stream. Next slide. And this is it on a regular day. Maybe a little bit of water in it. And so moving on, branch packing. This is a technique that's used when you have gullies. And gullies, usually when we refer to them, we're talking about when there's a storm drain outfall. It's created a stream channel. It starts as a little runnel. It starts as an open pipe at the end of a bank. And then it erodes that out. And then a section of the pipe falls in. And then it erodes further back. And another section of the pipe falls in. And before you know it, you have this V, this steep, horrible V that takes you up to a street or your yard or something. And that's one of the common ways that you end up with gullies. There's other reasons. I mean, lots of streams have become gullies because of the runoff that is directed into them because they've been straightened. All of the things that Riley talked about earlier. So this is a technique for the gullies that involve storm drains in particular, or over bank runnels that turn into huge V's. And this technique, it's similar to the brush mattress. You're putting it in a way that intercepts the flow. And the point of it is to catch the sediment that's washing down and start to build this slope back. And the live material that you put in there, that again, we're letting the willow be part of the solution here. So as it's growing and as it's spreading its stems, you know, this is a spreading plant. It's going to build and stabilize that slope, and you're going to start to arrest that gullying movement. Of course, it also helps to understand that source material, that source water, and address that at a stormwater management level. Is there anything you want to add to that?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, next slide. And so, you know, here's an example of gullying. You've got that storm drain. At one time, it might have fed a nice little swale. But again, even the swale, when it gets to the end of the bank, if it just waterfalls down the edge, down a steep edge, it erodes, it cuts back, And so it doesn't look like much, but next slide. Holy hell. Right? And, you know, in 1986, that's how high the water got. But you can just see that it can become a really devastating problem if it's not addressed early. Next slide. And so the kinds of things, you know, along the lines of gully repair involve, for example, using live plant material, using your branches to create steps along that gully and planting it So that it's on the one hand, as water's coming down, it's again kind of like that step pool channel on a headwater stream. It's kind of breaking its energy down the slope, but as the plants grow in, it's also again creating this way of dissipating and spreading the energy from the water. Next slide. And here's another situation. This one goes back to, what was the 2 words that Riley taught you? Bingo. So here's a dry stream. So most of the year it looks like a ditch. This is tributary to Reliez Creek. And you can see that the channel where it's stable is about 5 feet wide. I stood in it and I did this. And there's a sewer line crossing the stream. So this makes you nervous, right? When there's the line and there's a stream. Okay, so not too far upstream from there, there's a patio that's sinking and a fence that's leaning and a soldier pile wall, retaining wall made out of wood that is collapsing. And this was what called us out. So I went and I looked for, I looked behind the wall and here's the stream. And I mean, it's 2 or 3 feet wide. And I looked at that and I was like, I'm not sure that's the right width for this stream. And so that's why I went downstream and I was like, okay, 5 feet wide. So we want a channel width that's going to carry the flow of the water. When we talk about equilibrium channels, we're talking about channels that have the width and the depth that's going to maintain itself at that dimension. Might erode and might deposit sediment, but it's going to keep doing it consistently at that ratio. And so what we talked about with this property owner is finding a way, and this house was maybe 10 feet from there, okay? So we talked about how do we give the creek room and keep you safe? And go to the next slide. I think we have a little diagram. So here are some diagrams sort of thinking through how to achieve that. And, the simple one is the 2 to 1 or 1 to 5, 1.5 to 1 slopes of regrading that other edge, giving back that 2 or 3 feet, creating that slope so you have a stable transition to the upper area, or doing a partial slope and a partial terracing at the top. And, I had Zoom meetings with this family because they were fired up to get it going and do it. And I am behind on my report writing, which some of you heard today. And so I was meeting with them over Zoom to walk them through this to get to where they could take action. And I understand that they actually implemented this. I don't have photos of it, so this is part of my follow-up. But this gives you an idea of how you can make these situations work in fairly constrained conditions. Next slide. So, I was mentioning how stormwater, knowing if it's coming over bank, if it's creating gullying, we have some techniques for you to help stabilize the gully, but it's really important to address where the stormwater is coming from. And so there's a whole array of stormwater management techniques that are being implemented. You'll see it in parking lots everywhere now. These detention basins or these shallow basins, rain gardens, swales, biofiltration strips, rain barrels, all of these things are techniques that are being used and encouraged and funded through grant programs to be implemented to reduce that big trench of water from hitting streams all at the same time. Because one of the biggest problems we have with urbanization, right, is we have all these paved surfaces, huge more amounts of water are hitting our streams faster than they would have done in undeveloped circumstances. So as you're looking at your properties, you're looking at the stream, also look up at your house, look at your downspouts, look at your storm drains, look at if you're on a cul-de-sac, look at where the stream goes from the cul-de-sac or from wherever, and think about how else can we handle that stormwater to get it in the ground, turn your whole yard into a sponge. With the caveat that you don't want to infiltrate water right at the edge of your bank. You don't want to saturate your slope and instigate failure. So you want to do this further back on the property, away from those slopes and away from vulnerable areas. Next slide. Okay, so this is the little like rah-rah part, like fear not, you're failing creek. We've seen lots of different situations. You've heard about lots of them. Next slide. You know, you might even have failing concrete. You might have next. More failing concrete. Even next slide. You might have a really tight, deep stream that's 18 or 15 feet down, or some people have even steeper creeks than that. Next slide. With these techniques, there are Riley in particular has the history, and I'm working with her to help you guys also learn these techniques and use them to address those kinds of problems using natural processes, using natural engineering. Next slide. And even when it's near a building, this is being done successfully. Next slide. And so even when you have what look like intimidatingly steep banks, it's being done successfully. Next slide. And you know, you see people working, that's a long way down. Next slide. And the other thing is, these are techniques, as Riley was saying, these are things that you can do with your friends, your neighbors, with cores of people. This is not something that requires you to have, you know, a PhD. Next slide. And you end up with streams that actually look healthy, that are functional, that support wildlife and habitat, that support our fish. Next slide. And that can handle storms. Next slide. And I think that might be the last one.
Right?
I think it is, yeah.
Right.
And so, you know, Riley has published several books on this subject and has a third one coming. These same methods are discussed. Oh, did we just lose?
These last lights.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, we'll get-
Oh, there we go. Yeah, so, you know, you can get more detailed descriptions of these methods, of case studies, of how the evolution of planning and agency regulations around these issues through her books. And I don't know if there's anything else you would like to say about it?
No, you know, we're right on time for asking if there are questions.
Great, and I saw a hand up already.
All right, yeah, so let's get some lights on.
Hello,
Hi.
we own a property that's lower down in the Happy Valley drainage, up the Happy Valley drainage. Do you have information that the county or city can share to the source? You know, the water comes and people do what they do, but I'm just wondering, do you have the source creeks? There's a lot of them in the slope, going up for Happy Valley that direct, and it's very steep. And do you have any, is there any county information?
We do have a creek map.
I'm looking for source of the water.
It's rain, right? I mean, like hillside, trickling.
Not on my property, but
Okay.
across the Happy Valley.
Tributaries to
Tributaries.
Happy Valley. Yeah.
Source,
Yeah.
Source water, where does it come from? Because if you go by the Los Erebus and the fire station there, and you go up slope, there's all sorts of canyons there, and that water comes in Happy Valley Creek.
Yeah, so we have a creek maps that not only show Happy Valley Creek, but also their tributaries.
I'm just looking to educate myself about
Yeah,
where's the source.
You know, one thing that might be helpful is that there are historical USGS maps that you can download from the USGS. And if you Google USGS historical map frame finder, it'll take you to a site where you can actually navigate. You can download these maps and load them into Google Earth. And they're geo-referenced, so you can see blue line streams from that were mapped maybe in 1920, 1940, various years. And I use this a lot when I'm writing my reports. I want to see there historically And what does it look like now? I look at aerial photographs that you can download from UCSB, another one, aerial frame finder. And these are references that I use all the time. I will just say, from my perspective, if you maps on a map, there's a signature for a stream that we call a swale signature, right? So sometimes when a contour pops out, it means that the ground is rising. When it's receding, it's signaling a swale. And so even if it's not mapped as a blue line stream, a lot of times these things in the mountains that have that signature is where water is collecting, it's forming that swale. And it might be a seasonal stream or an ephemeral stream, but there's lots of ways that you can trace that on the maps, and you'll see it all around you as you're looking at where's the canyons and that kind of thing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Can you talk about permitting and contractors who can help do this kind of work?
I'm gonna kick that one to Riley.
California Urban Streets Partnership does have a handout that lists contractors who are capable of doing stream work. We don't endorse any particular business, but we have a list of contractors who do this kind of work. Permitting, if you're going to bring in a contractor to do, major grading, changing of the channel, retaining walls, anything structural, then you do need permits. And that's the California Department of Fish and Wildlife and the San Francisco Bay Regional Board. There are kinds of slides that we showed here, the pictures with soil, we call it soil bioengineering is the technical word for it. How you bundle plants and, put them in those stream banks. The agencies are, if you get a plan from us, and you follow the options in those plans for soil bioengineering, then they're not going to come in and require permits for that. We share those options and plans with the county and with the regulatory agencies. If they have any problems with them, they red flag them, they'll let you know. If they don't, then you can just do what's in our reports, those options in our reports.
And one of the caveats here is that this is about working with hand tools
Yeah,
and staying out of the
just with
water.
hand tools. So no riprap, rock, gabions, retaining walls, that kind of thing. And if you follow the options in our reports that are all going to be this sort of stormwater management, soil bioengineering type stuff, then the agencies will probably go along with it.
And we had a couple of hands on that side first, in the white sweatshirt. We might have a couple extra. I'm trying to reserve a few for my meetings tomorrow, but
We can post it online too.
yeah. And you guys pass this back. And yes.
I'm on the Lafayette.
Yes, they're the same.
I'm saying. Oh, this is a big turnout.
Sorry, I'd like to hear the question. I'm sorry.
So I'm on the Lafayette Creek where the conservation board, before I was born, put all the cement and it's starting to crumble and fall apart. And, to have some of them out, I don't know that kind of thing. But what would you suggest doing in the meantime, like where there's areas, would I be putting the willows kind of in the cracks or? I mean, no, I have no idea what they have to do. I mean, it would probably cost $100,000.
Yeah, I imagine that removing the concrete becomes a pretty intimidating project, and it would be something that you need to get permitted because you are.
Well, I don't have any money anyhow.
Right.
But what would you suggest for us to do?
As it's crumbling?
Yeah.
What would you suggest?
I was counting heads, we have about 62 people.
We have a crumbling concrete trapezoidal channel situation. And, it's on private property.
Well, Lafayette Creek did, yeah, we're all, we own our creek.
Right.
In the middle of it.
Right.
Okay, so
One
it's-
side is downtown Lafayette.
you know, what we try to do when we do site visits is look at your situation and go, okay, if this were my property, what would I do? And so I think you have to have that kind of, like a property visit to help you think about it, because there's a lot of moving pieces here that we've discussed. You know, there's undersized culverts, there's drainage coming from above, there's things that are too narrow, you know, so someone like Jessica has learned how to do the analytics. That's kind of like having a stream doctor, and the stream doctor has to go, oh, okay, this is what's causing the problems. Once we know what's causing the disease, then we can start to treat it. So you really have to have somebody who's got experience figuring that out.
Well, they also, so the stormwater drain, like you were talking about, they built all the condominiums, so now
That's not happening.
coming on my property.
How do you find these people that you're talking about that have this expertise and is this just contractor list that you're?
Yeah,
Fourteen,
we
or-
can provide a list of contractors. I wonder if we could, is there,
The website?
yeah,
Yeah, we could post it on the
we could
website.
post them on the website?
So we would like the blue packet or the packet and
Uh-huh.
contractor list.
Okay, we have a plant list too.
Okay. We can do
Okay,
that,
we,
yeah.
we can send you those.
Okay.
And go to the city website, is it called the Creek Committee website, or what's?
You wanna post, like a page under there? Do you think, the Creeks Committee?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Well, Lafayette City's website.
Love, love,
Love Lafayette, yeah.
That'll work.
Mhm.
Okay, are we ready for the next question? Gentlemen?
Simple question, where can we source the live willow stakes?
All right, so there are streams all over the place. And they may have ownership restrictions, like they might be on city land or state land. So if you don't have a stream in your backyard or your neighbor's yard that has willow on it or cottonwood, you can harvest from your own tree. Or from your neighbors to give you permission. If it's on, public land, you need to talk to the land manager, like the Parks and Rec Department, or someone like Environmental Services Department to get permission to selectively harvest.
Find a willow tree and see who owns it.
Yes. Yes,
Well,
before you, there was a question in the back, someone in the back, yes.
I was trying to work on our side, years ago, I couldn't find Willow. I called wholesalers, like I did.
Some of it.
If you just turn around and look at that creek, like,
Not like we can.
well, it's not, so you need to ask the city Parks and Rec or the Environmental Services Department if you can harvest somewhere. And sometimes, there's brush clearance that gets done to maintain clear flow. Or there might be reasons that some places do some clearance selectively for maintenance. And if you find out where that is, they might be real happy to let you go and harvest some.
Contra Costa County Public Works Department does do some scheduled clearing and cutting of plant material. And they want to make it available to people to use on their properties. So, you could try to contact the Contra Costa County Public Works Department and see, Public Works in, what's that name?
Sorry,
Tell me.
so along the line, where it runs behind the creekside park, there was a huge area of, sidewalk, like glass, that collapsed a couple winters ago. And each day mud is going in there and just finished basically, but putting like huge boulders at this big. Right, because like the fact that you're saying not to use that, like how is that gonna affect everyone else?
I mean, it's the thing you watch and you'll see how it evolves.
Yeah, not all agencies are created equal. I think the city is a fairly conscious
Yeah.
city about
the do's and don'ts on the streams.
Just like the,
But-
because us as homeowners, own part of the creek, like it's just really concerning that this project took place, you know, a block or two from our homes, and here we are downstream and like, yeah.
That, you're saying that was East Bay Mud,
Regional Park.
East Bay
Yeah.
Regional Parks.
If I may continue on that,
Yes.
Creekside Park you're talking about, yeah. So catastrophic failure of a bank. And there's a right of way leading from Mount Apple Boulevard through to Third Street. It is closed. The path is closed. The homeowner to the west of that path, his property was definitely compromised by the collapse of the bank. And the solution is 20 tons of riprap dumped there last month or so. And so we're hearing about these solutions from you today.
Yeah.
And somehow the city of Lafayette stands by and allows that to happen.
So we have, that's their property. They go through agencies to approve it. So what they're dealing with is those three permitting agencies, the Water Board, the Fish and Wildlife, and then Army Corps. When that was done, it was a temporary repair. There is going to be some rock there in the final repair, but they're also going to put in a fence. Not a fence, but a retaining wall to open up that pathway again. So I know you guys, hey, we just learned an hour and a half, don't use rock. That was,
I also heard don't use retaining wall. So, where are they gonna get all those little posts to build? I mean, I don't think that's gonna work.
The East Bay Regional Park District. Is that-
yeah,
They did use some bioengineered stuff just upstream of the failure.
Okay,
They didn't use it at the failure now. I don't know.
so you think that's a temporary emergency work before the final project is done?
yeah, no, that was,
'Cause that's common.
yeah. I mean, this was like emergency work that was done because the house was going to fall into the creek, and it's a 26-foot high bank, and they didn't have a few years for this thing to establish. And it was their property that they worked on, so we couldn't really tell them like, hey, you have to use these methods. All we could say is, hey, when you travel through our park to do it, you can protect the trees, put everything back where you came from, things like that. So we didn't have much say over that, but these agencies know of these methods, and everyone is trying to get greener, but there are emergency situations like that. Yeah.
Is there timelines that you can and can't do this work? I mean, right now, like the creek behind us is dry. It's often dry quite a bit, even into the winter. Like there's been no water in it, you know, with the rains that we have had this year. So is there room for that?
I think in general, if you're doing grading, you don't want to do any work during the bird nesting season, which is usually, with climate change, birds are nesting earlier. And so the official bird nesting date, I think, is in March. It's like from March to August. But I think we're gonna see birds nesting earlier and earlier. And so that date may shift. So you don't want to be doing something that disturbs nesting birds. But it is wise to do your grading almost as soon as the bird nesting date is over. People tend to do grading mid-August until it starts to rain. And then planting tends to happen during this time of year when the plants are dormant. And the goal is to stay out of the active flow of water. And again, when species are not likely to be disturbed by the activity. And I don't know if there's anything else you would add
Well,
to
you know, the handouts we just gave you, how to be successful with these soil bioengineered systems. One of the first things it says is collect the plant material from your willows or cottonwoods or whatever after they drop their leaves and they go dormant. Because if you take a branch off a plant after it's dropped its leaves. It's kind of the plant material is kind of like gone to sleep. And it doesn't care if you cut it and stick it in the ground. If you take cutting in July or August or June and it's hot, your plant material will die. Once you're there with a hose, you know, some property owners, you go, okay, I'm gonna plant this in July, but I'm gonna go out there every day with a hose, puts it down, and it's a hose bed. So you can do that, but if you want to increase your success rate, you don't take those cuttings until basically around Thanksgiving is when you see our trees drop their leaves. I just want to leave you with one of my favorite quotes from a soil bioengineering book that was written by the chair of the engineering department at the University of Michigan in Lansing. He said, the tensile strength of the roots of these systems, these soil bioengineering systems, is equal to or greater than the tensile strength of concrete. Isn't that something? Yeah, you know, they actually dug up a levee up near Sacramento that had willow on it. And with a bunch of scientists measured a cross section of a levee to see what was the root matrix like in that. And this scientist from the Natural Resources Conservation Service said there was 26 miles of roots in like a cubic yard of soil. Isn't that amazing? Yeah, and so you can have, you know, that area full of water. You can have streams like hitting them, you know. You can have the bottoms of streams, you know, entrenching because there's always sort of runoff. And the roots just follow down, right? Concrete just gets undercut. Riprap just gets undercut as the stream moves around and the bottoms go down. The roots of the plants just keep following the bottom of the creek. So, you know, it's interesting to me that somebody who was chair of a civil engineering department started to quantify the benefits of these plants and stuff. Another 7 minutes to go.
Okay.
All right, here we go. More
Okay,
questions.
there were two hands over here. Okay. Yeah.
I just wanted to encourage you to tell everyone here about the reports that you'll come out and do, because I don't think that's clear to everybody yet.
Okay, so if you signed up for a simple visit, site visit, I or potentially another person, Stream Tech, will come out. We will analyze what we see going on in sometimes a rapid fire way, as happened today on a number of sites. And then we're gonna talk about the options using the packet, like some things that you can do. And then I'm gonna write a report. Riley supervises and reviews the reports, and then we send them out to you. The caveat is I'm behind on my reports. And so if you are in a position where you need to take action on something very quickly, I'm gonna try to give you as much information as I can up front. And I will be available over Zoom and, you know, phone to answer questions along the way and to guide you in terms of how to stay within that zone where you're not having to go out and apply for permits. However, there are situations where you just have to do that. And so, you know, I just try to be as informative as possible in that way. But the reports are, because we do send them to the agencies, you know, they are better to have in hand in those situations. Yeah.
Real quick, question on that. Can that be the case for several homeowners that have a situation with a complex creek, you know, problem potentially?
That covers several properties.
Okay.
This came up with Fish and Wildlife before about permitting. And I honestly don't remember. I think they said that if the two properties are working together and sharing the responsibilities for the implementation, that it could be a joint permit request. But if it's like, you know, you're gonna do your thing and they're gonna do their thing, each of you needs to apply for a separate permit. If it's a permit situation.
Okay.
And you had your hand up.
I'm part of an HOA that has a stream going, right through it. The stream is all on private property. And we're at the initial planning stages of restoration plan. It's involved. And I'm wondering if there are any projects that, occur to you that might be representative of, what you saw today, Jessica, that we might be able to, talk to other HOA people who can like speak to our situation, or any other examples that might speak to, give us an opportunity to talk to somebody who's, you know, done work like this. Our HOA has never done anything with that stream, that's going through it. So we're up against 40 years of neglect.
Well, that's a really interesting idea. The old Soil Conservation Service used to do demonstration projects, and then they agreed with the property owners and other farmers or wherever to come see it. And we haven't done that. And that's a good idea. You know, what we do instead are two things. One is a slideshow like this. And these creeks are right here. A lot of these photos were from so we try to bring all these properties to you through a slideshow without, you know, bothering the property owners. The other thing is we look for maybe 2 or 3 a year properties where we can hold hands-on workshops. Get the word out, you know, we have to get a property owner who is okay about having some people show up in their backyard or whatever. And we go through, you know, this is how you take a cutting, this is how you put it in the ground, this is how you put fabric in. Those slides of the sites where trees had fallen over, those were property owners working on their properties with Friends of Creek groups and the RCDMS. So, you know, that's the other possible opportunity.
Now, I think the other part of your question might be, where are good examples of implemented projects at the scale of something like an HOA, multi-property, large stream? And I think there's a number of like regional and community parks where restoration projects have been done. And you know, I know, well, we showed the one at Keynes Avenue and Reliez Creek at the Berkeley-Albany border, which is a relatively small parcel compared to what your site has. But there has been sequences of restoration by different groups on Reliez. So it starts off as a small project, becomes bigger and bigger and bigger, continuum. And, you know, so I think there's lots of examples like that around, and I will put my mind to thinking of some of those examples and send some your way. But I also want to say, you know, each one of you lives probably in a slightly different area where the streams have slightly different characteristics. And knowing what the quality of the habitat in terms of like the tree species, the understories, the level of dryness, the level of wetness, the year-round quality, seasonal, all of these things are factors into when you're thinking about the vegetation you want to use. You don't want to, you live on a really wet stream, you don't want to put in species that are adapted to dry streams. You don't want to bring in something from coastal sage scrub and plant, you know, a sagebrush in your stream channel, obviously, right? It's, you want to take and use species that are appropriate and native to the location that you're at. You know, if you step outside to that creek, you'll see a lot of buckeye, you'll see a lot of willow, you'll see bay, you know. So think about, you know, get to know some of the trees that are native to your yard and to your neighborhood. And that's probably going to be the best material for you to use. It's going to last you the most successfully over the long term. Yes.
Public site visits that we've already done, because so far, particularly Creek, which is has a number of houses on it. It makes sense to do the whole thing. Because the water is coming on the left and affecting everybody downstream. And so if you're only going to be looking for regionals, will we be able to put together a story based on having those independent surveys done? I mean, is the city planning for those site visits?
No, so we are funded by Contra Costa County to come out and provide these visits that are free to you. And the, you know, one of the underpinnings for this is that, as you all know, you're responsible for your reach of the creek. And that is a intimidating responsibility for a lot of people. And so they hired us to come out and provide these consultations to just help you understand how to manage the creeks and give you some confidence. It's true that what happens upstream affects downstream and vice versa a lot of the time.
My understanding of this briefly is that someone upstream of this
Right. So,
Well, we can't impose ourselves on a private property if we're not invited. Right, so we have to wait for the invitation. Matter of fact, we ask people to fill out a little form saying we're inviting you to our property. And we have, yes, coordinated with side-by-side property owners and across the way property owners. And we like to do that. I've had property owners say, you know, they would knock on the door of the people that live across the creek. And then we get their contact information and they say, yes, they're gonna be friendly if we visit. So if you want to knock on your neighbor's doors, up and downstream or across the way, you'll get their contact information, refer them to custreams@gmail.com, which is how you sign up for a visit, then, you know, we think that's great. And yes, you're right. I mean, you know, these stream systems, there's a whole bunch of properties that are connected with each other. And sometimes it's awkward just to deal with one property when, you know, there's a lot of interactions. So, yeah, I love it when we have somebody knock on doors and try to, coordinate something.
And the understanding is that the PGA, sits on the other side, or the land's on the other side of the creek. So how does that impact and they probably own our portion of the creek, but like, you don't own they have a right of way,
Right.
to our property.
this is exactly why we do a site visit, because we can take all of this in and try to help you find your way through that agency maze.
Yeah, who's the owner and, yeah, sure. We have these pamphlets, so I bet we ran out of them.
Streams,
Streams.
streams @gmail.com. Yeah, CUSTREA. And I saw a hand here first. Yeah, Resource Conservation District, Contra Costa. That's, and you have.
Yeah, are willows a protected tree in Lafayette? We plant all these, so we have to be able to cut them down.
I think we should ask that question to the city.
We'll probably be fine. I'm not.
Well, I think riparian trees are protected in general.
I know Bay is protected.
Yeah. So, I guess, you know, but you can trim a willow. You just can't take it out and, you know, he's gonna want, but willows can take a lot of trimming. Let's just say
That they
that.
can. Yes.
So I have a question. If there's a neighbor's trees falling into the stream that's in my property, would that become my responsibility?
It's, wherever it fell from, that's the person's responsibility. So if you have an address and of the neighbor whose tree fell, we can come out, take pictures and send them a letter. Hey, you gotta, you know, they're not.
And then if, let's say you come and visit our site and we see like our neighbor, they built like a concrete retaining wall down the stream and we have flooding. Would there be a way for you guys to kind of, what's gonna happen there?
Well, so we can, on the one hand, Because we're not in the business of busting.
Yeah, we're not regulators, we're not gonna turn somebody in. But we can at least provide advice on how to cope with the situation.
Exactly. Yeah, so we might look at it and say, well, here are these techniques that we've been showing you that would apply to address the impact of that wall. Now, there's nothing stopping you from calling a regulator.
That does happen. Where somebody gets on the phone with Fish and Game or the water board and say, my across the way neighbor is throwing junk in the creek and putting in riprap, and so their enforcement programs can come out to that address, but you have to have the exact address.
I just want to say thank you. You guys, this has been really, really informative. Really appreciate it.
Will,
Yeah,
and the city
yeah.
for saying